I'm going to begin by describing a little bit what Generation Ratify Virginia is and why we are so excited about having Karishma with us here today. So Generation Ratify Virginia is the Virginia chapter of the youth-led movement to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and fight for gender equality. For those of you not familiar with the ERA, it is the amendment that would guarantee equality on the basis of sex once and for all. Women have been fighting for the ERA since 1923, and we are closer now more than ever. Our organization also focuses on legislation and campaigns that promote gender equality. We also support organizations that aid in women's rights. GRVA, or Generation Ratified Virginia, is very excited to help facilitate this meaningful discussion and learn more about these issues. So now I'm going to transition into a time where we introduce our lovely question askers, moderators here. And I'm going to kick it off with introducing myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Abby Garber, and I am the Policy Director for Generation Ratify Virginia. I am so thankful to be hosting this town hall along with my lovely policy committee to hear from Karishma, because I really value her progressive platform and her lived experiences as a woman of color in America, as well as a pre-K teacher. And I'm going to pass it off to Felix now to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Felix Hedberg. I'm the Policy and Communications Deputy here at Generation Ratify, and I'm so excited to hear more about Karishma's policies and experiences. And I will pass it off to Bailey.
Hi, my name is Bailey Logan. I am a member of the Policy Committee for Generation Ratify Virginia, and I'm super excited to be here, and I'll pass it off to Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Brubaker, and I'm a member of the Generation Ratify Virginia's Policy Committee. I'm also excited to be here, but I will pass it off to Maggie.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm also a member of the Policy Committee for Generation Ratify, and I'm also really excited for today, and I'll pass it off to Gianna.
Hi, I'm Gianna Lathan. I am a member of the Policy Committee here for Generation Ratify, and I'm super excited to be here today, so hey.
You can see there's a common theme. We are all so excited to be here today. And a special shout out to our policy team, because this is their second day on the job and they are just jumping right in. I'm seriously so proud of them. So next, for the Woman of the Hour, Karishma Mehta is a progressive woman of color community organizer and preschool teacher running to represent Virginia's 49th House of Delegates seat. She is fighting to recenter working class people in politics. Now I will pass it over to Karishma to give a more in-depth introduction of herself.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so honored to be here as a woman of color, as a progressive, as a teacher. It is so inspiring to see young people fighting on the front lines of justice every single day. It makes all of this worth fighting for, and it's something that I strive to do every single day, centering the voices of young people, that are going to inherit our society, and that are making sure that we're fighting for the right things and centering the people who we need to center most. So grateful to be here. As Abby mentioned, I am a preschool teacher. My parents came to this country from India in the 80s. I grew up in a working class family that struggled to put food on the table. My parents worked multiple jobs to afford rent. We were at the time when they moved here, we were living in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so as one of the only immigrant families, we also struggled with a lot of xenophobia, a lot of racism in this country that comes with being an immigrant and being a young child of color in public schools. So I grew up, recognizing that there was somewhat of a difference in who is perceived to belong in America and who is perceived to not belong, not have the same rights, not have the same dignity in life. And so as I grew up, I went back and forth between here and India. I saw the immense levels of gender inequality, of poverty, economic oppression, that people in my home country have faced. And growing up, I have also realized that our country is not immune to any of those issues. In fact, as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the more marginalized we have been, the more marginalized we are becoming if we aren't fighting systemic issues. So, I grew up, in that working class family, struggling, graduated from George Washington with an immense amount of debt. A lot of women of color, especially Black women, are now saddled with thousands in debt. And so, we're talking about a point in our country's history where we're seeing massive levels of economic and racial oppression and inequity, and it's directly impacting the quality of life that women have here. So, in centering working class issues and centering, basic guaranteed economic and human rights, we are also centering the lived experience of millions of women in this country, trans women in this country, that have historically been on the front lines of these issues, leading the movement towards justice. And so I'm very honored to be running in this district to continue to center those Black women, Black trans women who have always been on the front lines and who need to be centered in these conversations, especially when it comes to legislation. So with that, I just want to say thank you for all being here today. I'm excited to answer some questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karishma. We're going to begin with a period of pre-written questions by our policy committee team. But the first question that we have comes from Felix. We are painfully aware of the coup attempt that happened a week ago today. And while this is a women's rights town hall, we want to make sure that we center that issue as well, because it is a grave threat to our country and to our democracy. So Felix, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yes. So recently we saw an insurrection by racist, anti-Semitic, and white supremacist domestic terrorists at the Capitol. Now, Richmond is in a state of emergency in preparation for armed demonstrations at the state capitol. Do you have any general thoughts on recent events, and how can we protect BIPOC communities from this right-wing terrorism?
That's a great question. My school that I work at was also directly affected by this insurrection. I am, very appalled, but also, it's very, I think, very powerful to see people call this out for what it is, which is white supremacy. When we recognize what that means, both in the historical context of this country and how white supremacy has been emboldened under this current administration, under the systemic issues that people of all political parties have not addressed appropriately for the community. We are seeing a moment in time where we are facing continued violence, continued uprising of these right-wing, neo-Nazi, white supremacist groups that will continue to harm our communities if we are not adequately prepared, not only to call it out for what it is, but to fight with direct action and also with legislation to combat a lot of these issues. One thing that I've heard over and over again in the past week is that we cannot allow the current administration or the incoming administration to utilize this political coup to embolden the security and the surveillance apparatus that emerged out of the war on terror after 9/11. That is something that impacted Black and Brown communities all over this country, all over the world. And I think that we need to be addressing this from the point of white supremacy, from these right-wing Confederate insurrectionists, and not from the standpoint of domestic terrorism to prevent, yet again, emboldened military police presence and surveillance in our communities that we know will continue to impact Black and Brown people first. I am very appalled at the chaos at the Capitol. I do not think that the response so far has been adequate, but we are moving in the right direction. So as long as we continue to call this out for what it is and ensure that we are attacking this at the root.
Beautifully said. Our next topic for today is going to be trans women's rights, and in particular, how race and gender identity intersect and the impact on basic human rights. The first two questions are going to be from me, and then the final one is going to be from Felix. So our first question is, according to the National Center for Transgender Equality, greater than 1 in 4 trans people have experienced violence because of their identity, and the rates higher for trans women and trans people of color. How will you use your position as a delegate to protect trans people, trans women, and trans men, specifically trans women, excuse me, and people of color from the epidemic of violence?
Thank you. That's a very important question. And I think that, we need to look at the trans movement in the historical context, as well as in the current context of, what are the root causes, again, of those, inequities disproportionately affecting trans women and trans women of color. I think that when we're talking about what we could be doing, a lot of times we're not, when we talk about women's issues, we cannot talk about them, just sort of separated from economic issues, separated from environmental or, social issues like housing, healthcare, education. Those are all, when we're fighting for those basic human rights, we're also fighting to ensure trans justice. So one of the things that, or at least a few of the things that I would want to do is to ensure that trans people have the ability to not always use GoFundMe for healthcare, to be able to seek the care that they need through a compassionate healthcare system that views them as human beings, guarantees their right to healthcare. Trans people, especially trans women and trans women of color, are disproportionately unhoused. We also have to talk about the housing crisis and ensuring that all of our community members have guaranteed housing as we move forward to prevent a lot of the interactions that we see between law enforcement and the judicial system and trans women. We're also talking about racial justice within those issues. And so removing something as simple or basic as removing traffic enforcement from police purview, or removing police from schools, reducing the ability or the amount of times that Black trans women of color, trans women in general, come in contact with law enforcement or the legal system, ensuring that they are kept safe and away from systems that have disproportionately impacted them in an unjust way. So those are some of the things that I think about when addressing those issues. Cannot think about them in sort of a vacuum, and ensuring that when we're fighting for economic human rights, we're understanding that when we're fighting for those, we're also fighting to center the voices of trans women and trans women of color, because in the end, when there is inequity, they're the ones who are going to be impacted disproportionately the hardest. So thinking about it in that way, and always centering those voices that are marginalized.
Absolutely, absolutely. Our next question is, a national study by GLSEN reported that 75% of transgender adolescents feel, quote, unsafe at school. Using your background as a preschool teacher, how will you make schools across the Commonwealth safer and more welcoming for transgender youth?
Absolutely. One of the more exciting things that I want to work on are community health clinics that are connected to and funded through the education budget. So ensuring that all public schools have a fully functioning preventative health and comprehensive health clinic that are on school grounds. Beyond doing, some of the more basic healthcare related, advocacy, I would love to see public schools have gender neutral spaces, whether that's locker rooms or sports or restrooms and bathrooms that are in this on school grounds, ensuring that there are safe places for trans women and trans adolescents in general to be able to feel safe while they're at school. I think another thing, coming back to school resource officers, disproportionately, because we don't have a comprehensive sex education protocol in this country, because we don't have adequate protections for young adolescents that are, that identify as trans, the relationship between a school resource officer and trans people that are in public schools, tends to be disproportionately negative. And so removing SROs and police from school grounds is a way to continue to advocate for the people who are directly impacted by police brutality, by marginalization, and by oppression, just based on their identity and how they choose to live their life. So those are some of the things that I would like to see done in schools. Of course, we have a very significant education gap. And so being able to have discussions, introducing literature and the history of trans people in this country, the Black trans women that have led a lot of the social justice movements in this country. Those are things that should be taught in public schools to be able to continue to teach children to humanize all of our students and our history and our community members that are oppressed. So those are some of the things that, as a teacher, I think about curriculum, removing police, and also ensuring that young trans adolescents have healthcare that they need on school grounds.
Absolutely. Felix?
Yes. A collective here founded here in Virginia, Hermanas Migrantes, has highlighted the experiences of trans women migrants, many of whom reside in Virginia. How will you, as a community leader and delegate, address and bring to light the intersection of trans identity and the migrant experience?
Absolutely. I think that we have come to a point in our country where we're seeing a continued demonization of migrants in this country. My family, my parents are not citizens in this country, but they do have a green card. I don't think that basic economic rights, things like basic human rights like healthcare, housing, education, should be based on whether someone is a documented citizen. If you're in this country and you're a human being, the marker of a compassionate society is to ensure, that you have the ability to be guaranteed those things. So, ensuring that when we're talking about healthcare justice, economic justice, housing justice, we're also including undocumented people into those pieces of legislation through an undocumented person's Bill of Rights, to ensure that they also have the appropriate rights guaranteed to them as a person living in this country. One of the other things, and coming back to this, is the interaction between undocumented people, people of color, and especially trans people of color with law enforcement. And so removing, and this is one of the things that's very important to me, is removing that traffic enforcement ability from police purview, significantly reducing the interaction between undocumented people, trans undocumented people with the police, and by extension, reducing the opportunity for interaction between undocumented people and ICE and Border Patrol and agents that seek to arrest and detain and deport people, for no other reason than not having proper documentation. So those are some of the things that, I think about. Of course, there are so many other areas, things like childcare, education, that we could be having those conversations around as well. But I think when we're talking about, this problem that we're facing in this country of what it means to be undocumented and living in fear, because you're seeking a better life, a dignified life, we're definitely discussing the apparatuses of police, of ICE and Border Patrol that are seeking to not only dehumanize, but to criminalize and deport human beings that are living in this country, working and seeking that better life for their families. So.
Beautifully said. Our next topic that we are going to begin is the topic of centering Black women in the feminist movement, and Gianna is going to take over on this one.
So my first question for you is, the feminist movement for over 100 years has had a repetitive problem of not amplifying the voices of Black women, which often causes the feminist movement to turn a blind eye to things such as racism and discrimination when it comes to Black women. How will you, as a delegate, work to be more inclusive to Black women when it comes to decisions like reproductive rights, equal pay, and equality for all women?
Thank you, Gianna. That's a beautiful question. When I started engaging with the community on, what a true justice-oriented platform looks like, one of the most common things that I heard is that Black people, and especially Black women, are not centered when we're talking about systemic issues. The work in fighting for liberation, in fighting for our human rights has historically been led by Black women and continues to be led by Black women. And, to not recognize that, to not follow that lead of a group of people that has faced violence and oppression and enslavement over centuries in this country, I think is a gross miscarriage of justice. And so every single policy issue is one that has an opportunity to center Black women as one of the most oppressed historically and in the present group of people in this country. A lot of the different ways that I think about centering that struggle, is ensuring that, we are seeking that racial and gender justice in schools, starting that from the very beginning, teaching historically accurate narratives, teaching Black women's literature, teaching children about that struggle in an accurate and culturally responsive context, to educate the next generation in understanding what it means to be a Black woman in America, what it means to constantly be oppressed, gaslighted, and continue to be marginalized in the conversation, even when we're talking about issues impacting that group of people. So education, removing racist disciplinary policies that affect young Black girls more frequently, ending that school to prison pipeline and push out from public schools, and ensuring that schools are a safe place for Black girls. Dr. Monique Morris has a beautiful documentary called Push Out that I highly recommend, highlighting the crisis that Black girls face in America, and especially within the school system, and recognizing that it starts from birth, and even prior to birth, and that now is when we get into health disparities Black maternal mortality. And so one of the things that I would like to address in Virginia is healthcare disparities for Black women, especially pregnant Black women that seek healthcare, seek support from a healthcare system that is also historically racist, that is also historically proven to proven to have health inequities when it comes to race. Affecting Black women. So investing in doulas, investing in maternity resources and support for Black women as we move towards a more compassionate, not-for-profit healthcare system that has addressed that inequity at the root. So, tackling education and healthcare to me is one of the bigger priorities in centering Black women. Black women are also the group that are most in debt with student debt. And so pushing for free college and trade school, investing in Black women's businesses. Those are all ways that we can continue to uplift Black women, continue to reduce and dismantle those systemic inequities when it comes to economic, racial, and social justice in Virginia. So I hope I answered all of those areas. There's a lot more that I could get into with paid sick leave and family leave, workers' rights for Black women in the workplace, unionization, all of those. Every single issue is an issue that impacts Black women. And so centering those voices and following the lead of the leaders in the movement currently is something that's very important to me. So I will continue to listen, continue to learn from the Black women doing this work in Virginia. And so I'm very excited for that.
Okay, so my next question is, the Crown Act was passed in Virginia in 2020 to stop workplace discrimination when it comes to Black women and their hair. How will you work as a delegate to make sure to support more acts such as the Crown Act to help stop discrimination in both the workplace and public places when it comes to Black women in Virginia?
That's a really great question as well. The Crown Act in Virginia, I think it's very important that it also apply to public schools. Young Black children should be able to wear their hair in whatever way that their family wants them to wear their hair. And that's something that is a very big issue in the public school system. My focus in ensuring that legislation is working with, the many Black women that are currently delegates, following their lead and understanding that they are also going to be bringing to the table a lot of racial justice policies and legislation, that will need co-patrons, that will need support from multiple House members to be able to push forward into law. And so, listening and learning and following the lead of Black delegates that are doing this work to protect Black women in Virginia is absolutely going to be one of my priorities, in making sure that we're actually getting that legislation, not just from, in written form, but also out into the community in praxis, making sure that there's accountability from employers all over the state in guaranteeing that equity within the workplace and within our communities.
Beautiful, beautiful. Our next section is about discussing period poverty, economic oppression, and its impact on working women. And Elizabeth has this section.
So my first question is, according to the Huffington Post, menstruators will spend approximately $1,800 on period products during their lifetime without added taxes. Although legislation enacted in Virginia last year cut the tax on menstrual products to 2.5%, this tax is still a burden on those who cannot afford period products. How will you work to make the necessary period products more affordable to Virginian menstruators?
That's a great question. Well, last time I heard, people start menstruating in middle school or high school. So, what I think we should really be doing is looking at the education budget and actually subsidizing and allotting a budget for period products to ensure that young people that are currently, going through the cycle for the first time and experiencing this change in their life have, guaranteed access to those products that starting in our schools. And that also starts with comprehensive sex education throughout public schools in Virginia. Those kind of go hand in hand with community health clinics that I want to continue to fund, mobile health clinics that I want to continue to increase funding and also presence in the community. When I was a young person, going back and forth between the United States and India, one of the major, concerns that I saw as a young person was that women didn't have access to period products. A lot of the times they would use whatever they could find, whether that was cloth or a hand towel or, just doubling up on, their underwear. I mean, those are the signs of, chronic economic oppression and poverty, in countries overseas, but also here. We're experiencing the highest levels of poverty and income inequality that we've ever seen in the modern history of this country. And so what we need to be doing is decommodifying period products. We need to be moving towards a society that recognizes this is not a choice. This is something that happens biologically, and that we need to be ensuring that as part of our healthcare system, we recognize this is something that must be guaranteed alongside of everything from dental and mental health care and vision and all of that good stuff. This is also a part of healthcare. This is also a part of a women's justice movement, and that we need to be working towards decommodification. I would like to see that tax completely repealed in Virginia, and when I'm delegate, I'm definitely going to be championing, a repealing of that tax.
Thank you. For my second question, companies like Bodyform and Kotex have started to use a more accurate red liquid instead of the traditional blue in their period product commercials, which has incited backlash for being too gory or disgusting. How will you use your position to address the stigma surrounding menstruation?
That's very unfortunate. I think the stigma, it comes from a lack of education. As a teacher, it always comes back to what are we teaching young people? Why is that stigma there in the first place? Why are we dehumanized for something that, is out of our control? That's something that's very natural, something that happens and is, a part of being a woman, part of being able to carry a child. I mean, all of those things are very normal things. And so why is there this abnormality then seen in another part of that normal process? So I think a lot of it is a lack of education. A lot of it is, young people not having the ability to talk freely about these changes that they go through. Not having the support systems that they need, whether that's a trusted adult or peers that understand what they're going through. And that's especially true for for trans adolescents and trans women. They're especially susceptible, to some of those issues. And so, addressing that from the root cause of educating people on, what that means, and how we can move forward to eliminate a lot of the economic inequalities when it comes to period poverty, when it comes to that stigma, I think can lift a lot of the that stigma.
Wonderful. Our next section is on labor, and that is wages, childcare, and undocumented workers. And this section belongs to Maggie.
Hello. So according to 2018 data from the U.S. Census Bureau, Women on average in the workforce make around 80 cents for every dollar men earn. The pay gap is also disproportionately affects women of color. According to National Partnership of Women and Families, Black women are paid 62 cents for every dollar of the white man. Indigenous women are paid 57 cents. Latina women are paid 54 cents. So although the gender wage gap has slightly narrowed in recent years, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. How will you support legislation and fight to guarantee equal pay as well as eliminate gender bias in the workplace?
Thank you for that question, Maggie. So, I think that when we're talking about labor, we often forget that, women are a huge part of the labor force. We're not only in the workplace, but we're also in childcare, and that in and of itself is also work. I think guaranteeing, a minimum of 12 weeks of paid family leave for all people, ensuring that workplaces are adhering to state policies of, equal pay for equal work, and ensuring that employers are not able to retaliate against, women that do face discrimination, that do seek rectification of issues that they're facing in the workplace. So ensuring that employers are not allowed to retaliate, that are held accountable, especially if they have state contracts, if they're doing, work in conjunction with the state government. Those are all ways that we can continue to hold employers accountable for wage inequality, and continue to push for those basic labor necessities, like paid family sick leave, the right to unionization, adequate healthcare, everything that's currently provided, under employment in Virginia. So those are some of the things that I would be thinking about when addressing wage inequality, and ensuring that all people, regardless of gender, are paid fairly for the work that they're doing.
And my second question is, mothers in the workforce are often restricted in their careers because they don't have access and are not provided with affordable and reliable childcare. Studies from the Center of American Progress found that improving childcare access, there is a higher likelihood of boosting employment of mothers as well as boosting earnings of working mothers. How will you ensure that all mothers in the workforce are provided with adequate childcare?
Well, this is a question that's very close to my heart because I'm a preschool teacher. And so one of my top priorities, as a delegate would be to introduce a universal pre-K for all, ages 0 to 5, for every Virginian in America, in Virginia. That includes, protections for undocumented childcare workers, and also the ability for undocumented children to participate in a universal pre-K program in Virginia. That would, come through, a pretty generous wealth tax on, the top 1% of Virginians that are making, over a certain threshold, and generate that income stream to be able to fully fund childcare for every single Virginian. I think that when we're talking about childcare, we don't think about it in that it is essentially like taking out a second rent or a second mortgage for families in our country. Families that I have served, that I have had in my classroom, have paid monthly tuition similar to paying for an apartment or paying for a home and a mortgage. And so I think that eliminating that, ensuring and guaranteeing that childcare is a human right, and ensuring that it is a quality program and it is a safe program for children, regardless of their documentation status. I think all of those are really exciting things for me to continue fighting for, not only as a pre-K teacher, but also a woman of color, also a child of immigrants, and knowing that when you alleviate that burden, there is yet another opportunity for our communities to live dignified lives. So I would definitely be championing that legislation and fighting for as many co-patrons as I can on that kind of bill, and guaranteeing that for all little ones 0 to 5 in Virginia.
That was so wonderful to hear. Thank you so much, Karishma. Our next topic is sex work and why it is important to decriminalize and protect sex work. And Bailey will be reading these questions.
So the criminalization of sex work puts sex workers at a disproportionate risk of sexual violence from clients, law enforcement officers, and pimps, excludes them from healthcare services, prevents them from organizing and properly advocating for themselves, and is altogether a gross violation of their human rights. As a delegate, what steps will you take to decriminalize sex work and protect sex workers?
Thank you for that question. I think the simplest way is to introduce a very clean bill that says that sex work is work and that it should be decriminalized, which means that law enforcement can no longer target sex workers just for being sex workers. I think that there is a significant level of, we've talked about stigma quite a few times in this town hall. There is a stigma around what women do with their bodies, what people do with their bodies. And I think that sex workers, are very aware that people don't view them as doing a dignified job. And I think that ensuring that we're protecting the people who are doing what they want to do in control of their own bodies as human beings is one good first step in asserting that we see sex workers, as human beings, as every bit deserving of housing and healthcare and pensions and all that good stuff that workers have, as we work to create a better society. I think another thing that we could be doing as we move towards a state that is better for workers. Right now, Virginia ranks the last out of all 50 states in workers' rights. So I think that as we move towards repealing right to work, which is a racist law that prevents unions from building power in the workplace, as we work towards those things, also ensuring that sex workers have the right to unionize. They have the right to, ensure that their needs are being met as well. Working to ensure that, we're tackling not only the labor aspect of it, but also the other aspects of just being a human being and not being recognized for the work that you're doing.
Amazing. And my next question is, when sex workers report sexual violence, and just violence in general, or trafficking, they're overwhelmingly met with dismissal, arrest, victim blaming, or further abuse from the police, lawyers, judges, and juries because of the stigmatization of sex work, which deters sex workers from reporting crimes against them and getting help. How will you utilize your position and influence as a delegate to work towards the destigmatization of sex work?
That's a great question as well. I think it comes down to when you're decriminalizing sex work, you're also ensuring that sex workers have the least amount of interaction with law enforcement possible and the most amount of access and ability to be guaranteed resources and support for when they do experience sexual violence on the job. Just as any job, there has to be protocol on how to address sexual violence, how to address abuse in any form of a worker. And so enacting, a Bill of Rights for workers, for sex workers, and making sure that, the same the same laws that apply to an everyday workplace also apply to protecting sex workers that are out in the community. Another thing would be to enact a right of counsel to ensure that sex workers have the ability to hire an adequate an adequate representation if they do need to interact with the courts, if they do need to interact with law enforcement, and making sure that they know their rights and they know that the process, what process they need to go through to be able to ensure justice for themselves.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Our next section is also going to be read by Bailey, but this is some questions that were submitted by our wonderful state lead, Hannah. So Bailey, take it away.
So the Violence Against Women Act is a landmark piece of legislation that has protected and helped many women since its inception in 1994, but has only scratched the surface of addressing the intimate partner violence. What will you do as a Virginia delegate to ensure that the Violence Against Women Act is reauthorized to protect women in the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. I think that it is a very important piece of legislation that we should be continuing to expand. One thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about how to address violence against women, and it's not something that we talk about, is the violence against Indigenous women and Indigenous girls in Virginia, in this country. We're facing an epidemic of violence against Indigenous women and girls, and we're not actually having conversations about that. So ensuring that there is adequate funding, towards programs that continue to protect Indigenous women and girls. If the federal government, is unwilling to provide that funding, as a state, we should be willing to work with the state recognized tribes and other Indigenous communities to make sure that they have the tools necessary to investigate, to appropriately address the issue that's going on, and to make it a collective issue, not just one that occurs within one community and doesn't impact all of us. And so, addressing that would be one of my top priorities. Of course, addressing domestic violence, is definitely something on my mind as well. When I'm thinking about the housing crisis, I'm also thinking about domestic shelters, ensuring that, families, especially women that are escaping abusive situations, have the resources that they need in the forms of guaranteed housing to be able to shelter and stay safe and remove themselves from situations that could potentially turn violent, to be able to ask for orders of protection, restraining orders, and things that would, by law, ensure their safety as well. So thinking about all of those ways that we can start addressing the violence against women issues in Virginia.
Awesome. And then what would be your top 3 policy goals if elected to the House of Delegates?
This is always such a hard question for me. There are so many things that I'm passionate about, so many issues that I care deeply for and see the connections with. I don't think that any area of policy is disconnected from each other. And so when I'm thinking about what are the most pressing issues for me, I think about our basic human rights, healthcare, housing, and education. And so, the things that I would want to work heavily on are universal rent control, ensuring that we are preventing landlords and corporate developers from gentrifying and displacing working families, and working towards housing for all, guaranteed housing in Virginia, society. And as far as education, universal pre-K, championing that childcare bill, ensuring that undocumented childcare workers and children are protected under that as well. That's something that's very critical to me. Healthcare, housing, and education, and investing heavily in community health clinics, mobile health clinics, health clinics that can operate on school grounds to ensure that all children have the ability to see a doctor whenever they need to, regardless of who they are, where they are, and how much money they have. So thinking about those things, I think I would be fighting for that on day one. I think there's so many other things that I could talk about, but I think those are the main three that I would want to champion first.
I'm so impressed that you were able to narrow it down, because I don't even think I could personally do that. So thank you.
Very hard, Abby. I still don't, I'm not quite sure, but I'm not quite sure that those are the only three, but those are definitely
Absolutely wonderful. Well, I do want to open up this space right now for any audience questions. But while we are waiting on some audience questions to possibly pop in, I do want to ask one final question that also comes from our panel here. And that is, what advice would you give to young organizers, specifically young women of color interested in politics?
Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother seminar, Abby, a whole nother webinar discussion. As a young person, as a woman of color, as a child of immigrants, I did not see myself represented in politics my entire life. One thing that I would stress heavily for any young woman of color, any person of color interested in politics, interested in organizing, is to uh, uh, is to see yourself in the work that you're doing, to recognize that the things that you're fighting for is a struggle that is connected and common amongst all people, and that when we're centering Black and Brown people in the conversation, we're working towards a society that truly frees all of us, because no one can be free until we're all free. And so ensuring that you're seeing yourself in the work that you're doing, in finding the right, in finding the people in your community that are also fighting alongside you for those same things. And they might not look like you. They might not, have the same background as you do. And that's okay, because in the end, it is so much more than just looking alike or thinking alike. It's about having those interests that are aligned towards working for a better society. And so if you're getting into it to fight for a better world, then you know that you're in it for the right reasons, and you can do great things when you believe in that, in the power of that collective struggle, towards a better world. So
Beautifully answered. We have one of the best questions you can get as a member of a campaign, and that is, how can we best support your campaign?
One of the things that I knew I wanted to do when I started this campaign is bring as many young people, people of color, and women into this process, into the political process, because we need that. We need your voice. If you're on this call, your voice is desperately needed in politics. It's because we understand that our collective struggle needs to be addressed from the root, from the systemic issues that are presented in society. And it's not about one individual. It's not about one bad actor. It's about a global system that continues to affect us all in a negative way, because it's centered around profits and not people. And so if you want to get involved, I recommend going to the website. There is a link to sign up to volunteer. We're going to be doing lots of text banking, which is always really fun, phone banking and relational organizing, talking to your friends, talking to people in the community, getting them excited and involved. It's all about bringing young people into the process, because the world that we're fighting for is your world. And that's what we need. We need more people involved, more people fighting on the right side of history. So definitely, please sign up to volunteer. If you are able to donate or know people that can donate, it's imperative that we, work towards a campaign that's not taking a penny of corporate or special interest money. We haven't taken a penny of that kind of money, and it's to ensure that when we do get to Richmond and when we are fighting in the General Assembly, that we are fighting for people, that we are not fighting for the organizations or the corporations and special interests that donated to our campaign and that have influence over us. So this is really a people's fight. We are trying to win this district back for people, and we want to represent it that way, when we do get there. So let's go ahead and build that coalition as strongly and fiercely as we can, and be unapologetic about that. So please get involved, get your friends involved. That's super important too. Talk to 2 friends, get them involved with the campaign, and together, we can do really great things in the upcoming year. So I'm so excited for that question. And thanks, Abby. I hope to see a lot of you, on the volunteer events that we'll be planning.
Most definitely. And then another wonderful question, when is election day?
Well, we were a little bit unsure about that because there is what's called redistricting that was supposed to happen every 10 years when the census comes out with new information about our community. It's up to the state government to redraw our district maps. That can change, when primary elections happen. Right now, we are pretty confident that our election is going to be on June 8th, right before the summer starts. And so we are sort of barreling like full speed ahead towards that, getting everybody excited and involved and keeping that energy going until that day. So June 8th, mark it in your calendars.
You heard her, folks. June 8th, mark it in your calendars. And before then, please make sure to get involved with the campaign. You can see Nick Brown, the campaign manager, dropped an email in the chat. Please feel free to email them if you would like to get involved, but I'm also once again dropping more links in the chat to get involved. And that is our hour mark, and that is the end of the questions that we have. Thank you so much to Karishma for joining this very, very, very meaningful conversation. And thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for their wonderful, wonderful questions. I really value each of your time. And so I want to wrap it up right now, but thank you guys so much for coming. And I look forward to seeing all of you guys volunteering with Karishma in the future. Have a wonderful rest of your night.